controversial John McKay and the surprising return of Minnesota's Bud Grant.
You know, Harry, Bud Grant's return after a year's retirement is sort of a shock, but when you consider his relationship with the state of Minnesota and with the Vikings, maybe it isn't that surprising after all. Because as you'll see next, there may be no better man qualified to lead the Vikings back to respectability than the man who guided them to 12 playoff appearances in the last 17 years.
Through the years, they have survived the shifting currents of time. They have endured the long winters of their land and have shrugged off its painful effect. Not even great personal tragedy has ever shaken the resourceful and resilient spirit of the Minnesota Vikings. No, even 4 Super Bowl losses could not keep Minnesota down for long. Always they have managed to lift themselves up to stand tall and proud. There seemed to be no storm they could not weather. That is, until 1984, when Bud Grant's departure and Les Steckel's arrival as head coach pointed the Vikings squarely in the direction of some fearful clouds. As the ground around them shook, the Vikings tumbled from their perch of among the league's elite, going from their division's main predator to its most unwilling prey. By year's end, a distress signal shot through the Metrodome. The SOS ultimately reached the ears of the very man who began the season by saying goodbye to the team he coached for 17 years. But the bond between Bud Grant and his following was not so easy to sever. It was this unique relationship that made it difficult for him to ignore the plea of Viking owner Max Winter.
If you're with an organization for any period of time, it almost becomes family. Max Winter falls into that category. And then after what happened last year, remembering that even though I had decided to step down as a gesture, they said, well, fine, but we'll keep you on full salary for a year. But when the club ran into some trouble, and I was asked by Max and Mike Lynn to come back, it was tough to turn down people like that and the treatment that I'd had. And if I can help this franchise or this team, you know, come back from certainly their worst season ever last year, then I'll attempt to do that.
Viking fans will no doubt be hoisting a glass or two in honor of his return. But it may be some time before they make any championship toasts. There is a historic parallel to Bud Grant's comeback because the team he takes over in Minnesota's 25th NFL season does not readily call to mind the glory of his Viking past. Instead, they bear a resemblance to that first Minnesota team that answered the call of expansion in 1961. They were a curious lot of castaways and rejects. What competitive fire they possessed was inspired by their first coach, Norm Van Brocklin, although his mind-over-matter inspiration often led them to lose ground rather than gain it.
Norm didn't care what you did. You know, you could clip a guy, you could hold him, you could do anything as long as you played hard and tough. And he was going to beat the hell out of every other team. And that's the way he wanted his players to play. One game he told we were playing, he said, the first play, he said, everybody is going to slug the player in front of him. He said, they can only call one 15-yard penalty. He said, I want every player to slug the guy in front of him. Well, it was just a mishmash. Some did, some didn't. I don't know if I think we're offsides or something.
Most of the Vikings went out of their way to get into a fight. Van Brocklin's young quarterback, Fran Tarkenton, did his level-headed best to avoid any form of contact. It was ironic that on a team of street fighters, this southern gentleman from Georgia would become the most feared of Vikings. Led by Tarkenton's improvisation, the Vikings were exciting, though not necessarily understanding when it came to the rule book. As a frustrated Van Brocklin burned away, the Vikings proceeded to regress, not progress. The course they were headed in ultimately symbolized by the most infamous play in their history.
Throws, completes it to to Kilmer up at the 30-yard line. Kilmer driving for the first down, loses the football. It's picked up by Jim Marshall, who's running the wrong way. Marshall is running the wrong way, and he's running it into the end zone the wrong way. Thinks he scored a touchdown. He has scored a safety.
There was little doubt about it. After 6 years of going in circles, the Vikings were in need of some new direction. A clear sense of order came to Minnesota when Bud Grant began to mold the Vikings into his own image of self-control and discipline. Considering the free-spirited ways of the team he inherited, it was not at all surprising that his arrival was met with a certain degree of skepticism.
We were getting ready to play Bud's first exhibition game here, and we hadn't gone over the kicking game. We hadn't done a hell of a lot of things we hadn't gone over. We didn't think we were very prepared. And practice is almost over. We thought we were going to the kicking game. Bud has us lining up for attention for the national anthem. And he had Carl Eller and some of the guys in the National Guard were the inspectors. And in fact, we sang Mickey Mouse to him, I think, or some song to him after that.
The Vikings' chorus of sarcasm began to silence, especially when it was their opponents who were suddenly crying wolf. Soon, not even the swirling northern snowstorms could keep the Vikings and their coach from choreographing a veritable ballet of victory.
They give us that cut, but it's not that hard cut. You know, you can still get inside of it.
The powers of the Viking defense were first harnessed, then unleashed. Thus, this unit, with the former penchant for pugilistics, evolved into the legendary Purple People Eaters. Among the men who came full circle in this turnaround was none other than number 70, Jim Marshall, now going the right way with a fumble, and even letting a faster teammate carry it in for him. Another man who triumphed was Fran Tarkenton. He replaced the image of the scrambler with that of a proficient passer. Indeed, in terms of yardage, the most proficient in NFL history. The Vikings rose to dizzying heights, capturing divisional championships with the greatest of ease. The stock of Bud Grant soared as well, especially in Minnesota, where he was reverently placed on the same pedestal as the state's favorite son.
I said today that I even saw some history made. I saw Bud Grant smile real big, and I think that's a good sign.
It mattered little to Minnesota residents whether Bud Grant grinned or not. They identified with his stoic nature and laid-back approach on life. His folk hero status remained undiminished, even when, in later years, it seemed that the Vikings' only chances of making the playoffs rode on a wing and a prayer.
Back to pass. He's going deep down the right side, and it is fought for, and it's touchdown! Touchdown! Rashawn! I don't believe it! The Vikings are in the playoffs! I don't believe it!
The recent tide of defeat is the only storm the modern-day Vikings must weather. And as Bud Grant returns in 1985, it is perhaps wise to listen to one old tale of survival, a parable from the past that speaks prophetically about the Vikings' future.
We talked about playing coming down in the Andes with the soccer team and the players who had to virtually cannibalize their friends to survive. In a situation like that, you know that if you if you get down to the numbers when it's only you and Bud Grant, it's going to be a tough situation that's going to come about, you know, because if one of you has to go, you know, I don't know. I wouldn't want to fool with the old trapper. But he's a type of individual that also going into a situation like that, going into the jungles of the Amazon or any place that would require the savvy to survive, I wouldn't want to be with anyone other than Bud.
I didn't anticipate what happened here. There would have been nothing that would entice me to go to any other club for whatever reason. And I think the rapport that we've had is that, you know, I played at the University of Minnesota. I barnstormed with basketball teams and baseball teams throughout this state, you know, early in my career. I fish and hunt, you know, throughout the state. I know many people, not only in Minnesota, but in this general area, the western Wisconsin, north and South Dakota, northern Iowa. I mean, this is where I was born and raised, and this is where I long to be. This is where I like to stay. This is where I want to raise my family. This is where my job is. And the best job in the world is working for the Minnesota Vikings.